I was there smashing the wall with others.
Good morning, listeners. Today I speak with Richard Pinard, a US born media audience researcher, now based in Prague, who in the 1990s worked in Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia for the Munich headquartered Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. So, just the first question would be like, how did you get to work in Radio Free Europe?
Well, I was living in Munich, where Radio Free Europe had its old headquarters back in the 90s. And I was working in market research at a company called Infratest. And my colleague, a Swedish colleague of mine, happened to do horseback riding with the secretary from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And she mentioned to her that they had a position open for a market researcher. And so I applied for the job. And because I was my studies, I was always interested in at university and what have you. I was always focused on Central Europe, and since at that time we were broadcasting in Czech and Slovak, Hungarian, Polish, also there was it was an interesting field for me. That's the Central European area, and I was from my studies a bit of an area expert already back then. So I applied and I got the job.
So, like, what time, what year do you remember you moved to Europe?
Oh, well, part of my university I did in Bonn in West Germany.
Oh, okay.
That was 1982, 83. So the first time I visited Europe was 1980. And then 1982, 83, I studied in Bonn. And in 1984, when I finished, I was on a tour of the communist countries of Central Europe with my university. And I simply got off the tour in West Berlin when we finished. It went Berlin, Dresden, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Bucharest, a couple of other places in Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, Moscow, Minsk, Vilnius, Warsaw, and then back to West Berlin. And I simply got off in West Berlin and stayed in Germany and found a job. So I was working some of the time in the mid 80s in West Germany.
Was it like a big shock for you to see the former Europe at that time? Like
to see you mean Eastern Europe or Central Europe or
yeah, the probably like both of them, the Central and the Eastern Europe. Like, was it a big cultural shock for you?
No. I loved it. I mean, of course, I had studied. I did German and Central European studies at college, and I spoke German already at the time, and French I had in school. So I was quite oriented towards Europe culturally anyway, as a person, simply. No, it was. I mean, the differences then were bigger than they are now. I mean, now it seems, or maybe I'm just more used to it now, but so many things seem very similar in the United States and Europe.
So, when you got the job, what did you do there, like specifically?
Well, as I said, I was in market research, so my job was basically, and it remains so also later. It was post factum quality control. So we would do, but at that time I was doing market research. So we would do, say, focus groups. For instance, in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, I did a project teaching market research, the newly arising, this was now 1992. So the newly, those countries were transitioning back to capitalism. And so they're what had formerly been the opinion research divisions of, say, the Academy of Sciences suddenly became independent private market research companies. They founded them. And so I went there to interview people from Estonia about what they thought about our Estonian broadcasts. Same in Latvia, same in Lithuania. I was more concentrated on qualitative market research, which means like small say, focus groups of 8 people. You might do, say, like a series of 12 focus groups of 8 people each. Whereas the quantitative market research, of course, the big empirical studies with 1,000 people answering yes and no questions. But I was more focused on qualitative market research, or in this case, audience research, qualitative audience research. So we would have focus groups or in-depth interviews with people who were listeners to Radio Free Europe in Estonian and had been for some years. And then we'd ask them, what do you think of our program? Does, program X, is it interesting for you? Are the subjects covered well? What would you recommend? What topics or other approaches might you recommend to make it more interesting for you? That type of thing.
What was like the outcome of this research in Estonia, if I may ask?
Sure, of course. Well, it was, as I recall now, it's 35 years ago. But as I recall, it was, people had been listening secretly for a long time during communism. And, they would say, okay, yes, we like very much your product because of it's balanced and it's not how do I say, it's not tendentious. That's the whole thing with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Our job was never to explain America to these people. It was not to explain any given ideology or anything like that. The idea was to give people, say from Estonia or from Latvia, from Czechoslovakia earlier, to give them information that was balanced. It was supposed to have always 2 sources for any story, and it was supposed to be fair and not tendentious. So, and then to allow the audience to make up their own mind what they think. It was supposed to inform their thinking, inform their decision making, and allow them to use their brains. It wasn't supposed to convince them that, I don't know, America is best or capitalism is best or anything like that.
Yeah, this is a bit of a different topic, but it's like a question about what was the most exciting experience for you, like when you were working at the radio?
Well, in a way, it's sort of connected to the job. The most exciting experience for me was when the Berlin Wall opened. So it started, I think it was a Wednesday evening, something like that. There was the famous press briefing with Günter Schabowski, this communist, East German communist, and he got it wrong and said that, yes, the borders are open between... somebody asked him, the East Germans were going to make some rule that East Germans could travel relatively freely to West Germany. And somebody asked him, a journalist asked him, does that mean also from East Berlin to West Berlin? And Schabowski hadn't really been given full information. He looked and he said, yeah, I guess so, and starting when? And he said, well, as far as I know now. And so people in East Berlin started heading for the border, the wall, the crossing points. There were crossing points between East and West. And then suddenly the wall was open. And the next morning I got on the train and went up to Berlin. And then that evening I was up on top of the Berlin Wall in front of the Brandenburg Gate, because there it was quite wide. It was like, I would say maybe 2 meters across, a meter and a half across at least. And I went there and there were lots of people up on it. They pulled me up and I sat with my feet into East Berlin, talking to people your age from East Germany. And they were asking, I don't know, they asked me questions, what's New York like? And I talked with them. It was just so wonderful. Suddenly it was all free and open. And where a few days before, if I had been up there, if I were lucky, I would have been arrested. And if I were unlucky, I would have been shot just a few days earlier. And then suddenly, and it had always been that way my whole life, because the wall was built before I was born. And then suddenly I was actually sitting there, and the wall meant nothing. And then the next day we started. People brought sledgehammers and crowbars, and we started breaking pieces off the wall, and actually made holes. And every thousands of people. I was just one of thousands of people doing it, and so within a very short time, people were smashing the wall. And I happened to do it on Potsdamer Platz, which is a big square in you probably tour it, Potsdamer Platz. But back then it had the wall going right across it. So I was there smashing the wall with others.
That was Richard Pinard. Thank you very much. And to the audience, thank you for your attention.
Thank you.